So, ranking the 2026 F1 grid, definitely not an easy task, and made all the more difficult by the fact that we now have 22 drivers on the grid instead of 20. So, I've done this, I think, every year for the last 3 years since I started this channel, right towards the end of F1 preseason. And so today I'm going to be making my 2026 version, ranking the F1 grid as I see it based on the driver's performance, both in 2025 but also recent years as well. Now, if you've watched some of those videos, you would know that I'm very consistent in how I rank rookies, and that is I always put the rookies at the bottom. So that means with one rookie in 2026, this is actually the easiest position in my grid ranking, and that is Arvid Lindblad at number 22, of course, since he is the only rookie on the F1 grid. Now, for Lindblad, he's of course coming in at 18 years of age, relatively inexperienced, only one season in Formula 2. A good but not great season, like I've said quite a few times already this winter. And so I do think coming in, even if I didn't have this rule where rookies were automatically at the bottom, I think there would be a good chance I would just keep Lindblad ranked 22nd anyway. And that being said, I think it's going to be a really tough learning curve for him. But I'm excited to see how he does in F1 in his rookie season. Now, number 21 is a driver who I think most people will not be super surprised to see very low down. And that is none other than Lance Stroll. Stroll continues to be one of the worst qualifiers on the grid, and that's a large part of the reason why I've decided to rank him this low. Even beyond that, he does have a tendency to have really poor spatial awareness, crash into things around him, and even his race pace, which does show up from time to time, shows up very rarely. And while he sometimes has good pace in wet conditions, it doesn't cover the fact that he's very, very poor the rest of the time. For the first time in his F1 career, he got whitewashed by Alonso last year. So again, that's never a good sign, especially when Alonso's in his mid-40s. So for Stroll, I'm putting him in 21st, so the second worst driver on this year's grid, at least to start. Now, number 19 and number 20 were pretty tough, and I thought these drivers are relatively close. Both of them had, I think, down years compared to the expectations that they had set for themselves the year before. But first, in number 20, I'm going to go with Franco Colapinto. Colapinto is really, for me, especially amongst the young drivers, he's probably the most Jekyll and Hyde driver of the group. His 2024 cameo appearance was honestly pretty strong. And he looked like he was going to be on pace for, really big things in the year to come. But 2025 was really disappointing. He got out-qualified by, Gasly quite regularly. I think the median qualifying gap was about 0.2 of a second. He had some incidents, crashes here and there as well. But that being said, the pace of the Alpine was pretty poor. So even though Alpine got some points last year courtesy of Pierre Gasly, the fact that, Colapinto wasn't able to score any, I think is more indicative of the Alpine and less on him, especially given the race pace was so poor. It just meant that, it was very, very hard to move up from Colapinto's starting position. But that being said, I thought it was still a pretty poor year. And so again, which of the two Colapintos did we see? The one that we saw in 2024, the one that we saw last year in 2025 is more indicative of the real Colapinto. And again, kind of hard to say. So I'm kind of covering the difference and putting Colapinto in 20th. I do think that there's some potential there, but we haven't really seen that yet. Now, moving on to number 19. Number 19 is Liam Lawson. So for Lawson, another driver who I think came in with relatively high expectations in 2025 after two pretty strong cameo appearances in 23 and 2024. Of course, got smoked by Verstappen 2 races, and then went and got replaced by Tsunoda. And spent the rest of the season at Racing Bulls, where he of course will race again this year. And I don't think he did that well up against Hadjar. I know Hadjar had some pretty impressive stats, such as the fact that he basically barely got out-qualified. He barely got knocked out in Q1, I should say. But for Lawson, I think he was the more experienced of the two drivers. The qualifying performance definitely hurt him quite a lot. and it's part of the reason why I'm ranking him so low, is I just don't think the qualifying performances are good enough to justify him being higher on this list. His race pace, again, a lot of these things I'm saying about Stroll, I said about Stroll, you could also say about Lawson. The race pace can be pretty good, but he also has had his fair share of incidents. I don't think it's from a lack of spatial awareness like it is with Stroll. I think it's more just the decision making and poor like being too aggressive in wheel-to-wheel, wheel-to-wheel racecraft is what's causing Lawson to have some of his issues, having too many incidents with other cars. But that being said, he could definitely be higher if I do this again next year. But at the same time, I think he is at a little bit of a risk of being of losing his seat at the end of this coming F1 season. So for Lawson, I think 19th is a good spot. And for me, those bottom four are pretty comfortably the bottom four there. I think from 18th up to, I would say 12, it was very, very close. And there's a really big gaggle, a really big group of drivers there. And it was kind of hard for me to pick out which ones to put in which order. But first up, in number 18 is actually the driver who Lawson replaced the first time at Red Bull, and that is Sergio Perez. Now, Perez, of course, coming back to F1 after a year on the sidelines, after getting dumped by Red Bull, driving for Cadillac, of course. For Perez, of course, while he was in many ways vindicated by the poor performances of both Lawson and Tsunoda at Red Bull to kind of justify why he struggled so much towards the second half of the season. The reality is that neither Tsunoda nor Lawson are really top drivers, and if Tsunoda was on this year's grid, I don't think he would be much higher than where I put Lawson, or I put Perez this year. So even though the performances are maybe about a little bit worse for Tsunoda and a little bit worse for Lawson compared to what we saw from Perez, there were also some structural reasons for that. And so for when you look at Perez coming back into F1, he's 2 years older than the last time he started an F1 season. Even before then, he was never a great qualifier. So I do think even coming into F1 at this point, I do think he's probably one of the weaker qualifiers on the grid. So that obviously hurts him. And then, of course, the fact that he's coming in with 2 years away, and that year break, he basically didn't really do a whole lot. Bottas was, reserve driver, simulator driver for Mercedes, so he was at least keeping busy. Whereas for Perez, he wasn't. And I do think that there's still some, overlying questions about things like his, wheel-to-wheel racecraft issues that we saw a lot of in 2024. And so I do have some concerns about Perez coming back this season. I think he'll be okay, but my expectations for him aren't super high. So I think 18th on the grid is a fine spot for him. Now, number 17, probably one of the biggest droppers compared to 2020. Last time I did this last year, 2025, and that is Esteban Ocon in 17th. For Ocon, the big reason why he's dropped so much is that his one-lap pace this past season was really, really poor. Got out-qualified by rookie Ollie Behrman by about 10th and a half of a second. And when your one-lap pace struggles that much against a complete rookie, then that's generally not a good sign. So for Ocon, even though he's had okay seasons, I don't think he's ever been an above average qualifier. For Ocon, this past season's results in qualifying for me were bad enough to justify me dropping him so much further down my list. That being said, the race results, race pace are still pretty solid, and it allowed him to get some pretty good results in the Grand Prix. But I think the margins here are so fine that I think one-lap pace is a little bit easier to differentiate drivers than it is with race Grand Prix performance, where it can be a lot more difficult to differentiate drivers. So for Ocon, 17th I think is a good spot for him. It's a little bit low, but I do think he's been passed by a lot of the rookies from last year's crop, and so 17th for him I think is a decent spot. Moving on to number 16, and number 16 driving for Audi is Gabriel Bortoleto. So for Bortoleto, the one-lap pace last year was actually pretty strong, and that's kind of saving him from being towards the bottom row and being behind Ocon and Perez. He out-qualified Nico Hülkenberg during their in their teammate head-to-head. So that was pretty impressive. Something that I'm not as surprised by, given his reputation from Formula 2. The qualifying pace was very, very strong, if a little bit inconsistent. He was a little bit slower. First third of the season, much faster than Hulkenberg, the middle third of the season, and then much slower, or a little bit slower again, I should say, the final third of the season. And then he also had quite a few incidents, especially towards the end of the season, crashing in Vegas and then crashing in his home race in Brazil as well. So again, there is definitely some scruffiness there, and he was definitely not the best at making the most of his pace. He definitely did not score as many points as he should have, and so in the race, in terms of the point spread between himself and his teammate, it was a lot bigger than he probably ideally would have liked it, and it definitely showed there was a lot of room for improvement there. So that's why I put Bortoleto 16th. I guess one of the lower rookies from last year's pretty excellent rookie group. Now, moving on to number 15. Number 15, I'm actually going to go with Kimi Antonelli. A little bit of a surprise maybe to see him this low, not be in the top 2 rows. But for Antonelli, there's some reasons, pretty concrete reasons why I feel like he's still only at this point right now. When you look at his qualifying deficit to George Russell, it was about 3.5 tenths of a second, which is pretty big. It could be somewhat concerning as well. If you look, for example, at Russell's gaps historically against his previous teammates, that's about almost a tenth and a half, almost 2 tenths slower than what Russell was doing against Hamilton. So again, a tenth and a half to 2 tenths slower than current Hamilton. Not great. And if you look even a little bit further back, you'd have to go back to 2021, for example. It's almost identical to what Russell did against Nicholas Latifi in his second season. While Russell's almost certainly a better qualifier than he was in 2021, generally that was his third year, and generally drivers don't improve a whole lot between their third year and, again, where their peak of their career is, where Russell is right now. He probably improved a bit, but not that much. So again, if you're being compared in over one lap pace to Nicholas Latifi, it's probably not a great sign. For Antonelli, he struggled a lot in Canada, didn't score a single point in the Europe, or he didn't, I should rephrase that, he struggled a lot in the European leg of the season, with the exception of Canada, which of course is not in Europe. And so the European leg of the season aside, he definitely had some okay results. He had some really good weekends like Brazil, where he was generally the best Mercedes driver, but a lot of weekends where he was second best, getting knocked out in Q2, even Q1 at times, and then having to make these very aggressive recovery drives. He did get into a couple incidents here and there, took out Verstappen at Austria, took out Leclerc in Zandvoort as well. And so there's a lot of things all around that I think Antonelli needs to improve on. Qualifying pace needs to be better, consistency needs to be better, needs to be less incidents, driving in other cars. And again, given that he's going to be 19 years of age this season, he's going to have a lot of time to improve, and I think he's going to have one of the steepest learning curves just because of how young he was when he came in. So I do expect him to improve a lot, but I think 15th is a good spot for Antonelli at this point. All right, moving on to number 14. Number 14 is one of the other drivers coming back from a year away, and that is Valtteri Bottas. Now, the reason why I put Bottas quite a bit ahead of Perez is that I think, unlike Perez, Bottas had a decent year his last year in F1. Absolutely obliterated Guan Yu Zhou in qualifying. About the median qualifying gap between himself and Zhou was about half a second. So very, very impressive there. And so again, it still indicates to me that Bottas's one lap pace is still pretty strong. So I do expect him to out-qualify Perez. And based on how things are looking in preseason testing, where the Cadillac looks like it could be competitive with the Aston Martin, I think, for example, Bottas should easily be able to out-qualify Stroll regularly, and maybe he'll even be able to, challenge Alonso as well in a kind of best, battle of the backmarkers, I guess, potentially for F1 in 2026. So I think for Bottas, one lap pace shouldn't be an issue. There's always been recurring questions, doubts about Bottas's long run pace. racecraft as well, and those things were issues at times in 2024, which is why I don't have him higher. But the one lap pace at least was very, very strong, and again, I don't really have any reason to doubt that it's still going to be not pretty strong. It should still be pretty strong even when he's at the age of 36. For Bottas, so 14th is where I've ranked him in my driver ranking for the 2026 F1 grid. So moving on to number 13. Number 13 is Isack Hadjar, one of the more impressive rookies on the 2025 F1 grid, I should say. For Hadjar, I kind of mentioned this already when I talked about Lawson, but for Hadjar, he had the very impressive streak of having one of the fewest number of Q1 eliminations of any driver on the 2026 or any of the 2025 F1 grid, and so again showed that even though the car was very good, it was still a midfield car, and even against the Williams, for example, which was I think in the same kind of benchmark, same kind of realm in terms of one lap pace. Hadjar was doing a very, very good job of not getting eliminated in Q1, at least at the bare minimum getting into Q2 and even Q3 on many occasions. That being said, for Hadjar, I do think that he was probably his performances were somewhat masked by the fact that I think Lawson came in, a struggling Lawson came in from Red Bull. He took a while to get his feet going, and what you saw in the qualifying gap once the second half of the season kind of happened was that qualifying gap that was about 2.5 to 0.3 of a second in the first half of the season basically dropped to about a tenth, a little bit less than a tenth between Hadjar and Lawson. So it does show that, it does kind of suggest that Lawson's got more and more comfortable as the season went along, and even though Hadjar was the less experienced of the two drivers, his growth curve was maybe not as steep as Lawson's was towards the end of last season. So I do have some question marks about Hadjar's ultimate pace, and those are questions that we should get answers to this year, as he'll of course be pairing up with Max Verstappen at Red Bull. The racecraft, to be honest, I thought, and race pace was a lot better than I was expecting as well for Hadjar. Coming in from F2, he had a bit of a reputation for being a bit wild, a bit hot-headed, and he generally did a pretty good job of not having too many of those kinds of incidents last year. Of course, he did, crash under the formation lap in Australia, the very first race. But besides that, I thought he had a very, very impressive rookie season, and it'll be interesting to see what he can follow that up with in 2026. Okay, so moving into the top 12, the first two rows on this grid here that I have set up. Number 12 is none other than Ollie Bearman. So for Bearman, in my eyes, he was probably one of the most impressive rookies on the 2025 F1 grid. He, I think, did the best job in qualifying relative to his teammate. And I'm kind of ignoring Hadjar in this just because, again, his teammate was a rookie who had basically swapped seats mid-season. But for Bearman, for example, he, I thought, did very, very well in qualifying compared to Ocon. And again, Ocon's a similar realm, some similar benchmark to, for example, Nico Hülkenberg, Pierre Gasly. Ocon and Gasly were almost dead even in qualifying during their time as 2 years as teammates. So the fact that, Bearman basically came in, out-qualified Ocon, showed, very, very impressive one-lap pace. And we'd already kind of seen this with Bearman, given he had actually out-qualified Hülkenberg during his 2 cameo appearances at Haas in 2024. So the fact that he was able to come into this car on very low notice and out-qualify a driver who's, again, very, very good, but also knows the car very, very well, I think showed just how good Bearman's one-lap potential already was before he made his full season debut. The race pace, racecraft is, I think, good, but it's still in the realm of, I think, there's a lot of, rookie issues that need to be ironed out. I think probably the biggest concern for Bearman is that he has had a tendency in his rookie season to kind of, what I would say, make a lot of what I would call Grosjean level errors, and that is where you just have a lot of really big stupid errors. The good news, I guess, for Bearman is that those errors came in pre-practice sessions and not in Grand Prix. He had 2 big errors where he basically overtook or crashed heavily during red flag periods in free practice session, and he got 10 place grid penalties. And I think one of them, the one in the British Grand Prix, no, it might have been one of them. I can't remember which of the two, but one of them basically cost him a very, very good starting position. And again, wrecked his race by having to sort of serve this 10 place grid penalty. So for Behrman, if he can get those, if he can keep the qualifying pace, whale outs, smooth out some of the small issues with racecraft, race pace, and kind of get rid of these big crazy errors that he had in the free practice sessions last year, I think he could have an excellent season. He could definitely put himself in the frame for a Ferrari seat in 2027. But I think he's also, so I think for Behrman, 12th is a good spot for him. So moving on to number 11. Number 11, I'm going to go with Nico Hülkenberg. So for Hülkenberg, I think this is a little bit lower than I had him last year. But for Hülkenberg, there's really two key things. One is that the qualifying pace we kind of saw this past season, that the age is kind of getting up there for Hülkenberg, and that he doesn't have the midfield leading qualifying pace that he used to. He only got into Q3 I think once or twice last year, and Bortoleto got in I think 5 or 6 times. So it kind of showed that the raw qualifying pace I think is not quite there anymore for Hülkenberg. That being said, race pace is still absolutely fantastic. Racecraft is still also very, very good. But just because the qualifying pace is not quite at that, front of the midfield level anymore, since he's almost 40, which again, it's not a big deal. But it means I can't really have him ranked any higher than 11th. I also think he got a little bit lucky with how many points he got last year compared to what he was expected to. Like looking at my expected points model, for example, he got something like 200% of the points he was expected to. So, and some of that was, Hülkenberg generally driving very, very well, but some of that was also good luck. And so I don't think it would be reasonable to expect Hülkenberg to get that many more points than he is expected to, again, in 2026. So, moving into the top 10, first up in number 10, I'm going to go with Alex Albon. So for Albon, he had a pretty good 2025 season, but it was also very up and down. The first half of the season was quite strong, was generally better than Sainz in qualifying, and he also had some very opportunistic races where he was consistently getting top 5, top 6 place results, and picking up big bags of points, on a pretty consistent basis. And at one point, I think mid-season, he had 40 to 50 points, and his teammate Sainz had a handful. So he looked, much better than Sainz at that point. Well, even then, some of that was, I think, just a bit of bad luck on Sainz's part, and maybe a lot of good luck on Albon's. By the end of the season, that kind of luck had rebalanced itself a little bit, but also Sainz was a much better driver in the second half of the season, and Sainz was regularly out-qualifying Albon by margins of 1/10 and a half, 0.2 of a second, 0.3, and just Albon was just not able to recover from those poor qualifying results to pick up good points in the races the way that Sainz was able to. With Sainz able to get 2 podiums in the second half of the 2025 season. And so by the end of the season, the points tally was much closer. Albon was still ahead of Sainz, so he can at least say for the end of for the 2025 season as a whole that he beat Sainz on points. He did still get out qualified over the course of the full season by about 0.07 of a second, but still Sainz is a very, very good driver over one lap. He was about within 1/10 of Leclerc, so again being within a 1/10 and a half, just under 0.2 of Charles Leclerc is again a pretty good result for Albon. And so I think 10th is a good spot for him. He's shown that he's very, very good and one of the better drivers in the F1 midfield. Maybe not the absolute best. Maybe I think Sainz is probably going to be ahead of him this year, but still he's shown that he's one of the better drivers in that midfield. Now, moving into number 9. Number 9, I'm going to go with Pierre Gasly. So for Gasly, he had a very, very strong 2025 season in a very, very poor car. Picked up points in a very poor Alpine when it really shouldn't have. I think picked up 22 total over the whole season, which was pretty impressive given how condensed and competitive the midfield was in 2025. And so for me, it doesn't really change my opinion of him a whole lot. I think ninth is a very, very good spot, and it's really one of the leading positions in that midfield group of drivers. I think for Gasly, the only thing I would say is that there was a point mid-season where Colapinto definitely had the measure of him in qualifying. I think Colapinto out-qualified him 4 races out of 5. And there have been moments in the past, like parts of 2024, I want to say, where Ocon was actually better than Gasly for like a 9 or 10 race stretch where he out-qualified him almost every race in that stretch. So there have been periods where Gasly will just kind of go missing a little bit over 1 lap pace. And given that I think he's turning 30. Yeah, I think he's turning 30 this year. From this point onwards, the expectation is that the qualifying pace will start to, regress a little bit. But still, he's one of the best drivers in the midfield. Very, very good in qualifying. Very, very good in race performance as well. And so I think 9th is a really good spot for Pierre Gasly. So now moving on to the top 8. And this is the lowest that this driver has ever been ranked in my annual driver rankings. And that is none other than Lewis Hamilton. For Hamilton, qualifying was a big problem in 2025, and that was something that had continued from the year before in 2024. Interestingly enough, Leclerc and Russell, those 2 years, out-qualified Hamilton by almost identical median gaps. Both of them out-qualifying Hamilton by about 1.9 tenths of a second. So again, does really show that there are really some issues with Hamilton in terms of 1 lap pace. Race pace, I think, is okay still. It's not as good as it was. I think in 2025 it was not as good as it was 22, 23, or 2024. And that's part of the reason why I'm dropping him down, because even the 1 lap pace isn't what it was before, and the race pace and stuff is just not quite at the same level that it was in those previous years, where he's just not quite even at a elite level in Grand Prix performance anymore either. And so for Hamilton, he's kind of in this weird spot where it's because he's still in a front-running team. His comparisons, the benchmarks all around him are generally front-running drivers. I think if he were to be in a true midfield team, up against, a midfield driver like, I don't know, we'll say Albon or say Ocon, or even his old sparring partner Bottas, I think he would probably look a lot better than he does right now when he's up against Leclerc in a Ferrari. And, the other drivers he's racing most of them haven't shown up on this list yet. I do think that makes Hamilton look a little bit worse. And again, some of that's just going to be with age. He is 40 now. 1 lap pace, again, makes sense that it would be, declining. But the race pace, I think, is a little bit surprising that it's kind of been as bad as it was this past season. But again, we shall see how it goes in 2026. Hopefully, new regulations suit Hamilton better. Otherwise, this might be the last time he's on one of these lists, as he might opt to retire. Or he, if he struggles again but stays on in Ferrari or a different team, might be a little bit further down the list in 2027. So moving on to number 7. Number 7 is Hamilton's old adversary, and that is Fernando Alonso. I think the first time out of the 3 or 4 years I've done this list where I've actually put Alonso in front of Hamilton. I feel like I was justified doing it this time because Alonso's 1 lap pace this past year was very, very impressive, especially for his age. Whitewashed Stroll in qualifying, basically didn't even have a single main qualifying session where he, made a mistake or got messed up and got out-qualified by Stroll. Out-qualified him every single time, all 24 races. So again, very, very impressive there from Alonso in qualifying. The race results are still pretty good. They're still, I would say, a little bit above average, but obviously not as good as they were in the 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago when he was driving for a Ferrari. When he was kind of seen as being at his peak in terms of Grand Prix performances. But he's still very, very good, and I do think he's maybe a little bit better than the other drivers at the front of the midfield, but I do think he's worse. He's than, I would say the true elite drivers, the true front-running drivers. And that's definitely the case for, qualifying pace as well. I do think Stroll is kind of masking some of that aging process on Alonso. And with Hamilton again, that's why it makes it really hard for a direct comparison between Alonso and Hamilton, because Alonso's teammate is one of the worst qualifiers on the grid, whereas Hamilton's benchmark is one of the best qualifiers on the grid. But still, I think based on what we saw this past season, I think I'm justified in putting Alonso 7th ahead of Hamilton in 8th. So moving on to the top row, top 6. Number 6 is Carlos Sainz. Even though he had a very scruffy 2025 season, the fact that we saw that turnaround in the second half of the season, and we saw a lot of the, what I would say is Carlos Sainz of old in that second half of the season, especially in races like Qatar, Baku as well. For me, I think made me very, very comfortable keeping Sainz in this kind of best of the rest spot in number 6, where he's right behind what I would say the elite drivers are, but also ahead of drivers like Hamilton, ahead of Alonso as well, especially given we've kind of seen a comparison between Hamilton and Sainz compared to or Hamilton and Leclerc compared to Leclerc and Sainz. I'm definitely pretty comfortable putting Sainz ahead of Hamilton, especially given that I think Sainz is at this point a better qualifier, and we can look at the qualifying gaps against Leclerc to show that. For Sainz, I do think he had a scruffy season in 2025 in terms of incidents, crashes, things like that, and that's something that he's going to want to work on for this coming year, 2026. Otherwise, there's a chance that some of the young drivers like Behrman, Hadjar, maybe even Antonelli, if they have really, really strong second years, they might be actually jump past Sainz into that number 6 spot potentially. But for now, I think Sainz in 6 is a really good spot. So now we get into the top 5, and this top 5 is really what I would call the 5, elite drivers on the 2026 F1 grid. Now, number 5 is the driver who finished 3rd in the Drivers' Championship this past year, and that is Oscar Piastri. Big improvement from last year, I believe. Last year when I did this video, he was behind Sainz and also behind Hamilton, I believe. And for Piastri, I felt like he made a big improvement in his 3rd year in F1. He's still behind Lando Norris in terms of one-lap pace, but he was a little bit closer than he was the year before, and so that's, I think, pretty good reason right there to put Piastri behind Norris, who of course hasn't shown up on this list yet. For Piastri, the race results also improved a lot, but what we saw towards the end of the championship fight is that there are some tracks, low grip tracks is what they're referred to, where Piastri really, really struggles, and he's much worse than Norris, and he's much worse than, say, Verstappen on those tracks. So that's a big question mark, a big weakness for Piastri. That's going to make it really, very hard for him to compete in a really close championship if he's going to have these like 5 or 6 tracks over the course of the season where he's considerably worse than his opposition. But that being said, the one-lap pace was really good. The cool-headedness, for the most part, was pretty good. There were races like Baku, obviously, where things completely fell apart, which were, issues that, situations that Piastri is going to want to make sure he doesn't repeat again in the future. And likely this season, it seems like McLaren are probably not going to be fighting for the Drivers' Championship. So again, for this season, for Piastri, his goal is going to be probably to try to solidify himself as team leader, try to make it so that McLaren stops favoring Norris as blatantly as they have in the last year or so. And maybe look for a better spot long term if he thinks that would be best for Piastri long term. But we shall see. So for Piastri, I'm putting him 5th. I think that's a pretty good spot for him for the present. So moving on to number 4. Number 4, I'm actually going to put in his teammate Lando Norris. So Norris, I believe, drops 1 spot from last year, despite the fact that he won the World Championship in 2025. For Norris, I think he's still clearly better than his teammate Piastri, but some of the issues that we saw in 2025, a lot of scruffiness in qualifying the first third of the season, issues with, basically crashing like he did in Canada, or just kind of underperformance, and feeling like it felt like he needed his team to rescue him on a few too many occasions. For me, at least put him below the 2 other drivers that he was kind of in the same league as, the same realm as, going into last season, and that was of course Leclerc and Russell. And since Russell and Leclerc both had very strong 2025 seasons, I think a lot less question marks about them. I've decided to put decided to put Lando Norris in 4th, despite the fact that he won the World Championship this past season. So number 2, number 3, I kind of implied, hinted at this already. Of course, number 3 and number 2 are Leclerc and George Russell. Number 3 is, for me, still George Russell. I think when Hamilton went across to Ferrari, it gave us a really interesting comparison between Leclerc and Russell. And I think what we saw is that the two of them are very, very close in terms of one lap pace. Like I said, the qualifying deficit or gap to Hamilton was basically identical between the two of them. And while you can on one hand argue that Hamilton was going to a new team in Ferrari, so there's a little bit of a deficit there. Because of how early Hamilton announced that he was going to Ferrari, he basically spent all of 2024 as kind of a lame duck driver. And so he was already kind of mentally out of it for most of 2024. So again, you can look at both things and say that they would have, potentially negatively hurt Hamilton for both, 2024 or 2025. But I think the one big difference that we did see between the two of them is that Leclerc, it felt like, was consistently much better than Hamilton in terms of Grand Prix performance in 2025 compared to what we saw from Russell in 2024, where it felt like it was much, much closer between Russell and Hamilton in terms of Grand Prix performance. I think for Russell, a lot of those issues that we kind of wondered about in terms of Grand Prix performance for Russell were kind of masked this last year by the fact that Antonelli was so much worse than he was. But, if Antonelli develops into the driver that Toto Wolff seems to think he is, we may start to see those issues, show up again. But for now, I'm going to put Russell 3rd, and I'm going to put Charles Leclerc in 2nd. I do think he is all around a little bit more complete of a driver compared to George Russell, with, I think, race performance kind of being the deciding factor for me. So that, of course, leads the driver in number 1, who's been number 1 every year that I've done this. I think 23, 24, 25, and then 26. This is the 4th year I've done this. Driver number 1's been the same every single year, and nothing that I've seen in the last year has really changed my opinion, and that is Max Verstappen. Verstappen obviously did some incredible things in the Red Bull in 2025. Came very, very close to winning a 5th Drivers' Championship in a car that was about 0.2 of a second slower than the McLaren. And again, very, very impressive. The relentlessness, the race pace, qualifying pace. Honestly, the qualifying pace last year was very impressive. It's something that seems to be getting better with age for Verstappen, not worse, despite the fact that he's almost 30 at this point. So again, very impressive on that front. Of course, the one thing I will say that I think I should say for Verstappen is that the one kind of chink in his armor is that he, of course, does have a tendency to have red mist moments, and of course we saw that in Spain last year, where he had a bit of a ding dong with Russell after the safety car restart. And that's, of course, one thing that I think he's uniquely kind of a unique weakness that Verstappen has that none of the other top drivers really have, and that's something that we I don't think we saw exploited is the right word, but for example, if we ever have a title fight between George Russell and Max Verstappen, I think that's something that Russell will try to exploit to the absolute maximum, given it's something that we've seen the two of them kind of have really heated words in the past. So again, that's kind of the one slight issue, deficit, one slight problem that you can identify with Verstappen over the last couple of years. But other than that, I do think he's all around the best driver on the 2026 F1 grid. So those are my rankings for the 2026 F1 grid. Thank you so much for watching. It's been a while since my last video, and you can kind of tell in my voice I'm still kind of recovering. I've been out with the flu for the last 5 or 6 days. But we have a couple weeks left until the F1 season gets started. So I decided I'd come back, resume activities on the channel with this video here, ranking the 2026 F1 grid. So thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.